Welcome to St George's Hall and to the second Roscoe event this year, our Bicentenary year. I'm Professor Mark Power, the Vice-Chancellor of Liverpool John Moores University, and it's been our pleasure to present these public events to the City of Liverpool since 1997, when they were founded by Lord David Alton. These events were named after William Roscoe, Liverpool's first citizen, and a man who transformed the cultural life of Liverpool. Education was close to his heart, and in 1823 he played an instrumental role in the foundation of the Mechanics and Institutes Library, the precursor of our university today. And 200 years later, we are celebrating his legacy and influence throughout a series of thoughtful and insightful conversations. We are celebrating our history through activities and events featuring our staff and our students. And we have commissioned our artist-in-residence, Julia Midgley, to capture some of the highlights. And Julia is here in the audience, just there. Julia, if you could wave. Thank you. Julia is here to actually produce some further artwork around this event, and we'll be sharing those on the website and social media channels. We're telling the story of our bicentenary through our people, and we're truly delighted to be joined this evening by two of our own graduates who forged their own paths from Liverpool John Moores University. Last year, Nisha Katona was installed as the university's first alumni chancellor and occupies the highest office at LJMU, presiding over graduation ceremonies and taking an active role in the life of the university. Sean Curran is a former student union president and now the parliamentary correspondent for BBC News, and he too continues to have close links with the university. So thank you both for appearing this evening in our 138th Roscoe lecture, and I look forward to your conversation. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What an honour to be here with all of you. Now, Nisha, the Vice-Chancellor mentioned there that you've done something that nobody else has done in the 200 years of the university's history. You're the first person to have been a student here and to have graduated who's now the Chancellor. So you're the figurehead, the ambassador for the university to the outside world. I'm just wondering what a newly minted graduate, Nisha Katona, would have made of the idea that if someone was to come to them and say, look, in a few years' time, not only will you be an MBE, a best-selling author, an entrepreneur, but you're also going to be the Chancellor of the university you've just graduated from. What would you make of it?
It is extraordinary. It is unfathomable, actually, to take myself back to then. Remember, I was a law graduate, so I graduated, wanting to go to the bar. And first of all, those things don't flow naturally. The entrepreneurism, the MBE, things like that. There weren't many in the law that had that, unless you were, High Court judge, and suddenly, you were gilded in that way. So you had a particular kind of ambition. This is vaulting ambition. What you're describing, it would be hubris and it's ludicrous. And it's really interesting. You look at chancellors, and they are people to whom you aspire. These are people that you're proud to go frankly to your parents and say, I'm applying to this university and this person is that chancellor. And it would be psychopathy on my part to think that I could ever be that person that you'd hold up to your parents and say, look, this is the person at the helm of the university. But what matters to me is if I can call them children because I'm old enough, but the students of the university, to think, to see what they can achieve with the kind of background that I had, with the beginnings that I had, I'm really what happens when you repeatedly fail in many ways. I was meant to do medicine. I was meant to pass my A-levels possibly the first or even the second time. It's an incredible thing that you can find contentment and you can have these roles.
I'm sure a lot of young people will tell their mums and dads, and grandparents, look who's the Chancellor at Liverpool John Moores.
They might.
I'm sure that they will.
Yeah. But what matters to me, I think, is the fact that there are students that look like me, that sound like me, that come from the same background, for whom, honestly, and I say it at graduation speeches, the world is their oyster. They can have the most extraordinary life, and I am blessed in that regard. And that doesn't come because of who you know or where you came from in any way. It comes from diligence, passion, and pushing doors that are meant to open for you in a way. And I think that is the most important message. So it matters kind of not whether their parents know me in a way. It matters that I look like many of the students at this university, and for them, they can have it all in that way.
That's a great message for any young person, I think, to hear. You as a young person, you're the daughter of 2 doctors. They came to the UK in the 1960s. What attracted them to Britain? Why did they come?
Well, those were in the days when Enoch Powell, there was a shortage of doctors in the UK, so Enoch Powell, before he changed tune, was saying, come over to England, there's lots of jobs here. And so what tended to happen in that day, I've got my aunties here in the front row, I've lost both of my parents now, so she's head of the family, and same with my auntie. What tended to happen in those days is that GPs from abroad would only come and work in the towns that no white doctor would work in. That was the way it was, quite frankly. So, and there's no indictment in that, it's just the way it was. So you'll see lots of Asian GPs and the lineage of Asian GPs in towns like Botley and Attlee and whatever it might be, in Yorkshire. And we came to Skelmersdale. And we had a fantastic, a GP that took my father into his practice, and he was one of the first Asian GPs in the whole of that area. And that brought with it its own interesting challenges, but was groundbreaking in that way. So there was no Asian community when we moved there. We were pretty much the only Indians in the village. And that made things very, very interesting. So, my brother and I were born here. My brother was born in India, actually. They came over with a youngster. And so growing up in Skelmersdale, as it was then, it was a new town in 1971, was really difficult.
Yeah, you said interesting, but it's not really interesting, is it? Because your family suffered racist abuse.
Yeah, it was. I tell you why it's interesting, because you look at where we are now. I was just reading the poster behind you while you were speaking, thinking, and it's so important, this, it's an incredible honor for me to be on this stage. And the truth is, all I can do is tell my story, warts and all. And it was marred in the beginning, so there was the most phenomenal racism. Some of my earliest memories, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining too much about this, but it does tell you, I think, a little bit about second generation, first generation Indians and why we are the way we are, why we keep our heads down and work and always feel slightly unworthy and slightly as though we are imposters. But, my mother was stoned on the way to surgery by the very patient she would then treat. My earliest memory was of a brick being thrown through the nursery window with the word, something written on it, Paki it was, but just regularly we would be firebombed in the garden. That was just the background noise to the way that we were raised. And so what happens is, as immigrants, because there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to run to, you become obsequious, and all you want is for people to like you. Because what else can you do? There's no battle to fight, you are outnumbered. So you desperately want to be loved by your neighbours, you want to be accepted. And this is trite in a way, it sounds it, but one of the best ways we could do that was with food, because we had little else to offer. We weren't particularly charming. We were, we had brown corduroys. We didn't, we weren't the cool people in the street, I can tell you that. But what my parents did, and this is, they were enormously generous with their hospitality. So they would cook. My mother would come back from surgery, my father, and they would cook huge pounds of this incredible food. And honestly, just go and plaintively invite the neighbours in to eat. And it would start with the youngsters, and they'd come in. And then some of the parents would come and bring I kid you not, they'd bring their own ham sandwiches because, Tommy doesn't like spicy food, whatever it might be. And that's how it started. But slowly it was very much food that became, that kind of buffer that brought actually people into our house for a half decent reason, and we formed friends in that way.
So food was a way of communicating with your neighbours?
It was a way of communicating with your neighbours. It was a way of being useful. And honestly, I still think that socially, and I think this is why food matters so much to me, because I'm short of time. One of the things that I can do for people is cook. I love doing it, and it's a reason why people would come to our house. Little more is required of you if you're going to lay a table with a load of food on it, and you're barefoot and it's homely. And that's the way it is in India. In Asian families, it's extended families, doors are open, people cook in the village and people come in, together. So bringing a bit of that to this nation was something that it was just very natural to us. And what's great, can I tell you about this nation, is that we were accepted then with open arms. And it always has been. I think Britain is uniquely open-minded when it comes to the world of the food, the food of the world cuisine, and it might be because of the fact of the empire that most of the globe belonged to Britain. Whatever it might be, there is whether it's proprietorial or just an acceptance of different cultures in that way. I've just been to America to look at restaurants and to think, would Mowgli fit here? And we're streets ahead. In many ways, they are streets ahead in terms of integration, but in people being able to express themselves authentically, in an entirely uncompromising way, Britain is quite wonderful. And just looking at the journey that I've had, and things are great now, but by Jove, they were very, very difficult, and it goes to explain a little bit of why I am, or why many Asians like me are the way that we are.
Yeah. What was your experience as a student like at Liverpool John Moores?
At Liverpool John Moores. First of all, you call lecturers by their first name, which was extraordinary. I have to say that your lecturers were like friends. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I used to moot a lot, and I think once you find a subject that you like, be it criminal law, be it family, be it animal law, whatever it might be, for me it was mooting. And so I used to compete up and down the country, and it's like having a hobby. You're studying, but it's just endlessly fascinating. Both my daughters are. One of my daughters is here. She's at LJMU doing law now, and it is so interesting. The other one is at the uni, has just finished uni of doing law, and it's just fascinating stuff. You open a book, and it was endlessly interesting. And the people that you meet as well. It was so I did law. I did psychology at the university for a year. Didn't like it. Transferred across to LJMU, and that was in part because I did some work experience in chambers. And I did some judge marshalling with His Honour Judge David Lynch, who's here, which totally, the scales fell from my eyes and I fell in love with this profession. Really helps when you're at uni and you've got an aim at the end of it. You're doing a degree because you want to do something with it at the end of it. So I was very propelled right the way through my experience.
And then you did go to the bar and you joined Lincoln's Inn as a member of Gray's Inn. I'm baffled as to why you'd have joined Lincoln's.
Food was better, I was told.
Yes. Well, Gray's Inn was a very raucous place when I was there. It was best not spoken about in public. And then you came back. You were a barrister here in Liverpool. I mean, did that feel as though you'd achieved your dream when you were working at the bar here?
It did. When you get that offer of pupillage, and this is, you asked me as well about my role here as Chancellor. There was no one that really looked like me at the bar then. There was no role model. You look at, there was in medicine, and I wanted to do medicine, but I just was not bright enough. It was not meant to be. And so I, did psychology. And then I did some work experience, and then I remember delivering a brief to Chambers with somebody that we both know, I think, Frank Ledwidge in Derby Square Chambers, delivered a brief and spent half a day with him and fell in love with the idea of being a barrister. Had no idea how I would get there. There was no, it is a big deal when actually you're not represented in a particular sphere in terms of, the fact that you're female to an extent as well as being Asian. But what I love about the bar is that we are a bunch of kind of liberal bohemians and open-minded, and so it was a completely, getting into Chambers was an entirely level playing field. It was about, do you fit in? Are you quite a good laugh? Are you articulate? Are you bright enough to do this? Have you got the emotional capacity and tenacity to do it? And you kind of were in. So it was an incredible moment to be offered pupillage in Liverpool, which is when I started. But when I started, there were very few women, again, at the bar. You were a minority, but it's just different. You operate in a slightly different way. It was nice to the few of us that there were, to see how you do. I tell you what's really interesting is when you start, and I'm 5'1", and if you're negotiating hard against someone that is 6 foot, with a wig on, and you're kind of negotiating to their, the poppy in their lapel, physically, I can't tell you, you have to you sharpen yourself in a different way. It's things like that, the physiology of how different you are when you start out, and then you watch how it helps if you can see how you negotiate just that physical difference between two of you in that way of giving way in conversation and negotiating and being the louder voice and learning to sit at the head of the table, and all of those physical things that I think for men who've seen it just take for granted. But coming into the business world, again, it's carte blanche. It's the same thing. It's all of those challenges all over again. Because, of course, the majority of entrants to the bar are now female.
There they are. It is over 50% now, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Did you find when you moved into business and hospitality that the men you were dealing with, were they intimidated by the fact that you were a barrister?
The men intimidated by me being a barrister, I don't think, but I think, do you know what the sad truth, or whatever it is, the truth is, I think people mess with you less if they know you're a barrister. So so when you're starting to build a restaurant, it's a lot of meetings with contractors, and it's things like heads of terms for land deals, and I think they will try, they're just a bit more respectful and take you a little bit more seriously, whether that's right or wrong or whatever. So it gives you some gravity. I only came to business when I was in my late 40s, and I think there's so much greatness that comes with age, just that gravity, knowing, by the time you're 40-something, you have had all your corners knocked off, that you've got very little pride left. You know which battles to fight and which not to fight. You know how to treat humans, possibly because you've raised children. You know how possibly not to break people that work for you. So there was a lot that was great about coming as an older woman and coming with a legal background. Suddenly people do treat you well. I have to say, there wasn't a single murky or underhanded or dark negotiation that I ever had to do, and I thought it would be. I thought the world of business would be pockmarked with that, and it hasn't. It's been a place of complete, honestly, dignity. Really has. It's been a great world to immerse in.
You had a very successful career at the bar. Was there a moment when you thought, I would like to be a judge, and this is the way my legal career would go? Or was the food and the cooking always something that you thought would take over?
I would have loved to have been a judge. What's interesting when you become a judge, and there's many judges in the room who will tell you it changes very much. So when you're at the bar, there's such a sense of camaraderie. You have this huge community, and you're running up and down corridors into courtrooms. It's so social, from the ushers to the clerks to the other barristers to the solicitor, your solicitor clients, professional clients. It's a lovely atmosphere. To become a judge is very different. Suddenly you're in chambers and you're in the back, and you're no longer in that sort of main dining room. It's for so many, got to be the ultimate aim. It really has. But what happened is the entrepreneurial bug bit when I started to think about doing some of those judging exams. And what I thought is, look, I can do both. I've got the X chromosomes, I can do both. But Mowgli took over really astonishingly. So I built Mowgli while I was still practicing at the bar. What happened is I used to teach Indian cooking while I was still a barrister, and people very much liked the food and would constantly ask me for the recipes. So I thought, maybe there is something in this, maybe. And I think it's many an immigrant's dream to open a food stall, to sell those things that are those heirloom dishes at the heart of their grandmother's cooking back in, in their home country in that way. It's a real dream. And I was raised with a lot of disdain for business. Doctors, Asian doctors, business was not a great thing in India. You know, it was something that was a bit of a, you know, full of corruption, etc. But once I started to think about this idea of perhaps I could peddle just 2 curries and chapatis from a little stall in Liverpool somewhere, it became like a living, breathing thing that would not let me sleep. And so the dreams of taking the judge exams were very much put aside until I brought this thing to life. But by the time I brought Mowgli to life, Mowgli had really become this living creature that had taken over. Because thank God we had queues around the block, and that has not abated. It is astonishing. And she demanded my time 100%. So 3 months in, I couldn't bring myself to pack in the bar, so I took a sabbatical, and I'm still on that sabbatical 9 years on, technically.
Okay. So you might go back.
You always think that, because you never have the temerity to think this is going to last forever and it's going to be incredible. You always think I could always go back to the legal laurels. But I'm building, you know, my 21st restaurant at the moment. I now have 900 staff who need me. So this is like a family. So yes, I always think, it's crazy because of all the things that I've achieved or whatever, you know, all the things that have been given to me, whatever's I have, it's that point about me having been a barrister. That is what sailed me through 20 years of my life. And it's what I'm just saying this out loud, being really disinhibited, but it's what changes the tone of the conversation slightly when you go into a room and I'm this little, and I'm just saying this because this is how I feel, this little Indian woman or girl as I was, and you know, it's suddenly, if you can say that you're a barrister, people take you a little bit more seriously. You know, I'm not talking about respect or being treated differently in any way, but I think the way that they see you and all of those thoughts that they might have about you being, you know, this little Indian that hasn't really achieved anything, it just changed the tone. So that's something that I am so proud of. I am loath to give it away. For 3 years, even once I had the restaurants, people asked me what I did, and I'm ashamed to say, Sean, honestly, I still would say I'm a barrister, but I've got kebab shops. You know, I'm a barrister. Isn't that pathetic? I'm just telling you that because I've just managed to slough that off. You know, that need to hold on to prestige in whatever form it is. So I'm still finding myself, you know.
Were there transferable skills from being a barrister to being an entrepreneur and driving a business?
Very much so. And it's people management. And it really is. So you are meeting, as a barrister, you are meeting people at the, so I did child protection. Cut my teeth on crime, then child protection. You are meeting people at the lowest point of their life. The lowest point of their life. And the only job I had, one was to secure or to keep focused on the welfare of the child. That's everyone in that courtroom is thinking about the same thing, whatever that might be for the advice for your client. And secondly, to leave your lay client with some form of hope, whatever that hope might be, whether they have their child with them or not, whatever it is. And so if that's what you do for 20 years, 3 cases a day, where you are meeting people at their most broken and trying to instill hope in them, it makes you quite nurturing, really. And so now I have, again, 900 people. And you know, at different stages of their life. And I've always aimed to build a business or build a work, this is the thing, isn't it, to build a workplace where it's almost nicer to be at work than it is to be at home, because there's all kinds going on in everyone's lives. You know, people are splitting up with boyfriends, they're struggling living with their parents, whatever it might be, mental health. Work should be a place of solace. It should be a place that feeds you, as the bar did for me. I skipped into work every day. That was not work. I loved every minute of it. And that's my ambition, is to build a business in this nation where people actually want to come to work and don't want to leave you, and they don't want to leave us, which is extraordinary. So the aim of Mowgli, when I started my restaurants, I needed something that got me out of bed that was bigger than curry, really, because the curry I can do in my sleep. The food is easy for me. It's in my fingers. It's easy. And I wanted to build a business that simply existed to enrich lives in the cities that we go to, starting with my people. And that, I think, came from me being a barrister, is that you are there in whatever form to enrich the lives of the children that you're dealing with, really. And these, I do feel as I've got a family of 900 children, you know, because I think I'm probably the oldest amongst them, really. Yeah, and that's true. And so it really does help you craft a business in a way where every day my main concern is how do I make the lives of my employees extraordinary.
Now, the popular image that we have, I think, of chefs is, and of chefs in kitchens, is of people who are doing a lot of shouting, sometimes a lot of swearing, but it often seems to be a very macho and a very aggressive culture. And I know from talking to you and from reading about the way you approach business, that is absolutely not the way you do things at all. Does it work?
Does it work? I'll tell you how much it works. We, as I say, we've got this enormous body of staff. We have 4 vacancies. So we fill our vacancies. There is no shortage of people. We keep people. They come in and they stay with us for 9 years. That, to me, is something that works. It's really interesting. My daughter here did a shift in Cheshire Oaks yesterday, and she came back and said, you know what, it's really hot in that restaurant. And I remember being a waitress and the restaurant being mercilessly hot for the teams. What that does is it makes the child working there, whoever's working there, think, this is great to work, you know, for a couple of months, but I'm sure as heck not doing a hospitality career. And so I had just because of that one comment, I had a meeting with my entire estates team and operations team today to say that I want it to be that nobody is ever even physically uncomfortable in my restaurants. That's not okay, because that does not lend to them wanting to stay there as a career. They will always think of it as something you do as a student. That's not okay. You know, so it does work. If your focus is how do I make their lives utterly pleasurable so they want to be in work, what happens is you've got happy chefs who cook good food, happy servers who make you feel you're home from home. But I think it's because I did domestic violence. A lot of domestic violence, didn't do it, but, you know, operated amongst it. That we had it was completely zero tolerance policy, which is right. And coming into hospitality, it's the same thing. I have a zero tolerance policy on any bullying, on any, honestly, really, even swearing. That's not, I'm quite matriarchal in the way that I run the business. You know, I also always think I wouldn't want to bring my grandmother or my auntie into this kitchen if you speak like that. So it's really important. So we are absolutely intolerant of any lack of respect. We want people to feel nourished, purposeful, and fulfilled at work. And having the brutality of that macho culture does not help. You know, that's tyrannical. But it's very similar to the mantra of domestic violence perpetrators. They would say, I shout because I care. I only shout and I only get into a mood because I'm a perfectionist and I care. That is tyranny. In any sphere, that is tyranny. You do not tolerate it. I do not tolerate it in my business. I would rather have a slightly imperfect roti that is not round than have people that are broken around my kitchen floor. So I'm very passionate about that.
And, I mean, you mentioned failure at the beginning when you were saying you'd not done as well as you'd hoped in some exams.
Yes.
How do you react when people fail in your business?
How do they fail? Do you know, this is so even the question is something that I find hard to understand, because honestly, my view is, as long as you're kind of doing your best, there is really no such thing as failure. The right doors open and the wrong doors stay closed for you. Some people, I look in my people, and every decision I make in Mowgli has to be imbued with 3 things: grace, intelligence, and I'm talking about emotion intelligence, and graft, i.e. the busier you get, the more you come alive. So there are some people that come to Mowgli, and the busier it gets, the more they sort of sigh. They need to move on and find a job in, you know, Clark's or somewhere where it's just quieter. That's not failure. That's finding a job.
Other businesses are available.
Yeah. Where else is quiet? But it's true. You know, that's not failure. That's just finding a job that suits you better. So we will help them do that. We will help them write the applications. But to come to hospitality and work in Mowgli, it's busy, and we need you to be, you know, more and more euphoric every time that door opens. So it's things like that. So to me, there is really no failure. We've had very few partings of company, as big as we are, with in any kind of an acrimonious way. It really is. We need you to be a better person working here. It's got to be good for the business. And if you haven't got grace, and what I love about grace, intelligence, and graft, actually, if you hold any person up to that, any decision, any modus operandi, and if it's lacking in any one of those, then it is time to part company. But they always understand, because they don't, if actually you are somebody that's a bit sweary and a bit brutal in the kitchen, then you need to find a different kind of kitchen. You won't feel at home in Mowgli. So there's no such thing as failure. There are right doors and there are wrong doors. And that, I think, just raising my own children, honestly, once you have the faith to feel that, there is such liberation. There is no such thing as fear in that way, and what a great way to live. You've just got to do your best. Your aim in life is basically to make the person that you're talking to at any one moment, the person next to you, feel better about themselves. That's it. That's all you really need to do in life. There's no such thing as failure. It's as simple as that, I think.
Okay, that's an excellent message. I think that can be transferred into
anything,
lots
really.
of spheres. There's also, sort of at the heart of Mowgli, this kind of charitable drive as well, isn't there? How important is that? I mean, if I was to say to you, you could have 10 more restaurants, but you're going to have to scale back on the charity.
On the scale back on the charity. But you'd never say that, Sean, would you? Because I think we all... What's great is that it's baked into this business. So when I started Mowgli, I had a job. I had a really good job that went about every day trying to make people's lives better. That's what we do at the bar. When I started Mowgli, I knew that I would need a more overarching reason to do things, and so before I even built Mowgli, I started a relationship with Clatterbridge Cancer Charity then, and my aim was to have a dish. I had a dish called keema. Keema just means mincemeat, and I was going to give the proceeds from the keema dish to Clatterbridge, and I would call the dish chemotherapy. People with cancer loved it.
Yeah.
People, families who, the Clatterbridge families loved it. Other people couldn't cope with it. So I changed that, but I had Clatterbridge as my co-parent in that restaurant.
So you had to change it because people who didn't have cancer, or who didn't have family members, they found it offensive? Or?
They found that a little close to the bone, but anybody with cancer and any of the cancer families didn't, because the money was going to, and 1 in 2, this is why I chose Clatterbridge and all my charities, the cancer charities or children's hospices. 1 in 2, in the Northwest, 1 in 2 of us will live with cancer. 1 in 2 of us, that's one of us. It's, it's something that we need to touch and hold and feel and talk about. Anyway, that was when I pledged every restaurant that I would open, I would have a house charity. So in every restaurant we have a charity champion, a dedicated member of the team who is just there to raise funds for whichever house charity we have. So we've raised over 1.7 million now for local hospices and charities. But we also support a number of world charities. So for every full-time member of staff that we employ, we sponsor a child in need. So what that does, and it's mercenary in a way, 1, because 1 in 2 of us will get it. It is so important that we give back. But secondly, I have these children that they can be in their 40s. To me, they're still children. They come to work for me. They need to walk taller as a result of working for Mowgli. When you go in to work and you have something that is outward facing, and you're making a difference to the community and the world around you, it feeds this. That's that business about nourishing. Work has got to be purposeful, nourishing, and fulfilling. So having the house charities and having Mowgli predicated on how do we make the world and our cities a better place feeds my people. They then don't want to leave. We send 40 members of our team, we pay for them, and we pay them while they're there to go and live in villages in India to see the work that we're doing with these charities, so that when they come back, they switch a light on and turn a tap on, and life is never the same again. They have absolute perspective. We all need to feel that. It's the more people I can send out to do that, the better. So what it does is it feeds my people, which makes my business a better place, but it also is great for the community. So yes, charity will always be really at the helm of what we do. I call it co-parenting because we don't just choose any charities. We choose charities that come in, spend time with my people, take them around the hospices. Our people then go and volunteer there. They go and clean out the gardens at Maggie's, for instance, or Clare House. We run a dog show. Please come to the dog show. I'm really nervous about ticket sales. It's on Saturday and Sunday of next week, where every penny of the profits goes to Clare House. You know, and then our people go and work at the dog show. It just feeds their souls. It's a great thing to have.
Now, we've talked about the business. We haven't talked about the food.
I see.
So, if I was to come to you, I'd never heard of Mowgli, and I would say to you, well, how is your restaurant different from another Indian restaurant? What's the answer?
There are many ways that it's different. The first thing is the food and the nomenclature. Honestly, it's really interesting. So the food is how Indians eat at home. If you came and ate in my home, you would have Mowgli food. That's the truth. My auntie was cooking so that we've got something to go back to eat today, and it's her dal, and it's her cabbage, and it's exactly that. This is the way that we eat when the curtains are drawn, when the guests have gone, and very often it is plant-based, and it's lentil-based, and it's virtuosic, and it's light. It's all of those things, those words that you do not associate with curry, which is heavy and radioactive, and all of those things, which is great, because we stand on the shoulders of curry houses. So in that way, the food is different. But I remember, just building Mowgli, I never wanted those words. The words, the way that curry works in this nation is about the 1700s, honestly. The Hindustani Coffee House was the first curry house back in London then. And what we did is that we brought this food, the Sylheti sailors jumped ship and came to Britain and brought Indian food to Britain. And we looked around and we saw that what you like is you like chicken breast, which we do not understand at all, cubes of chicken breast in a thick gravy. And so we totally modified the way that we cooked to give you that, and we made names up so that you would like us. So things like pasanda just means chicken I like, balti means bucket. So even the language, we just, doffed our caps and gave you words that you could say, honestly, and dishes that you could palate. Indians do not eat that way. We would never take the chicken breast off the chicken. You cook bone in. You don't thicken sauces. It's always gluten-free. You have these light, vigorous liquors full of flavor. It's an entirely different creature. We don't use words to describe our dishes like that. If we're cooking bean curry, we'd say, tonight I'm cooking beans with cumin and mustard paste. We don't have the kormas and the whatever, the boonas and the dansaks of the world. That's not how we even speak. So it was really about coming away from that, and that's why on Mowgli menus you will not see any of those words. You don't get a korma, you don't get a naan bread. Indian houses don't have naan ovens. We have chapatis. All of those things that you think about Indian food. So Mowgli was very different in that way, and it was a risk. And I never thought she would succeed, and as a result I negotiated a 2-year break clause because I thought she would fail. I also decorate. I still design every single one of my restaurants, and I design them in a way that I could fail tomorrow and I could take curry out and put coffee and cake in and we'd be all right. That is honestly how I design them. There is still that anxiety that you might not like what we're giving you, but that is actually how we eat at home. So it couldn't be more different. The other thing I do is I don't take Indian chefs that know how to cook Indian food, because having a boss like this little Indian woman coming in and telling big hairy bloke how to cook, they would not have it. Honestly, I remember having a couple of Indian chefs, and what happens is, the truth is, if I worked in an Indian kitchen, I would change the food to make it taste like my nan's, and that's what happened. So I, on principle, take locals who do not know how to cook curry, and I train them. And so the legacy for me, when I shuffle off this mortal coil, is that you'll have a load of Brits who know how to cook really authentic curry. That's the aim. Right. Curry evangelism is what I call it.
Now, we're getting very close where people will be able to ask you questions, but I'm going to ask you this kind of last question. It's a bit of a cliche in these kind of conversations that I would say to you, what advice would you give to the 18-year-old Nisha? So I'm not going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Instead, let's throw forward, what advice would you give to your future self? What advice, thinking now, would you give to Nisha when she's 70?
What would I be telling her to do?
If you're thinking now, if you think ahead 20 years, 30 years to that point, what sort of things would you hope to be doing? What advice would you give?
This is really basic, apart from the vitamin D and the calcium, which is really... Honestly, I have realised that, and I think as I'm getting older and I'm beginning to crumble a bit, health is so very important in every way. And so it's about marshalling yourself in every single way. So it's health-wise, it's keep walking, keep doing those things, keep your mind active. I can't take, because everything feels like broken toys when your health goes in any way, honestly. So no matter how big this empire is, something happens to your family, your loved ones, and something is flawed in the way that your body works, everything can just swim down the river. You know, everything is just broken compared to that. And so I have to really keep telling myself that I've got to take time for myself. I've got to keep trying to walk, just saying to my family as well, I've got to keep walking the dogs. All of those things, just keep active as I can, physically and mentally. But I think the really, really important thing is my sense of worth, and this is incredible that I'm here, but my sense of worth and contentment, and I saw it in my parents, in my father, who just was a workaholic, and then he retired, and within 2 years, heart attack, and, died. So it's really important that my sense of worth and contentment cannot come from what I perceive to be work and prowess and robes and all of those things. It is a deeper thing, and it's contentment, really. Physical, emotional, spiritual contentment.
I suspect that no one will ever let you retire, because I think even if you did decide, I'll step back a bit, you'd have a queue of people outside the door wanting you to come and help them with all sorts of endeavours. So I think that,
learning to say no, Sean, is a
well,
really
there you go. Maybe that would be the advice
that
you could give to, Nisha when she's 70.
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. Could I just ask you to give a round of applause to Nisha?